The galaxy had been peaceful for so long that most species no longer believed true war was possible. There were border disputes, trade conflicts, political pressure. Entire economies had collapsed because of sanctions written by diplomats sitting in climate-controlled towers orbiting distant suns. But real war? The kind where planets burned and civilizations disappeared? That belonged to history archives and museum recordings. The Valkyrie Dominion intended to keep it that way. For nearly 4,000 years, the Dominion had ruled the outer spiral arm through one simple principle. Speed was survival. Everything about the Valkyrie reflected that belief. Their ships were impossibly thin, built from silver biological alloys that flexed like muscle beneath vacuum-hardened armor. Their engines folded local space so efficiently that entire fleets could cross systems in hours. Their wars ended before enemies even realized they had begun. Most civilizations surrendered the moment Valkyrie fleets entered orbit. The Dominion expected humanity to do the same. Supreme Commander Thalek stood inside the observation chamber of the war carrier Ascension Spear, watching the blue world rotate beneath him. Third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. Primitive, slow, dangerously overcrowded. The Dominion had spent years studying human transmissions. Their networks were chaotic. Their governments argued constantly. Their entertainment broadcasts made no sense. Half their species seemed obsessed with fictional violence while the other half argued about food, music, and politics. They looked divided. Weak. Easy. Their defense fleet? Thalek asked calmly. A holographic officer bowed slightly. Minimal, Commander. Orbital patrols only. Their heavy assets remain hidden behind the lunar perimeter. Thalek almost smiled. Hidden assets. Every young civilization believed secrecy could compensate for inferiority. Begin orbital intimidation, he ordered. The bridge came alive instantly. Outside the observation glass, thousands of Valkyrie ships shifted formation with impossible precision. Silver hulls reflected sunlight like blades floating in darkness. Energy signatures bloomed across the void as weapons armed in synchronized waves. Beautiful, efficient, perfect. Earth would surrender within the hour. Then the lunar shadow moved. At first, nobody understood what they were seeing. The object emerging from behind Earth's moon was too large for the Dominion sensors to classify correctly. Warning symbols flooded tactical displays. Measurement systems failed. Distance calculations contradicted themselves repeatedly. One officer stared at his console in visible confusion. Commander, the system believes the object is geological. Another officer answered immediately. It cannot be geological. It's accelerating. The thing continued moving forward. Slowly. Deliberately. Like a continent deciding to drift across the ocean. Silence spread across the bridge. Even Thalek stepped closer to the glass. The human structure was monstrous. 5 miles thick. Over 12 miles wide. Layer upon layer of black armored plating covered its surface like overlapping tectonic plates. Thousands of gun batteries lined its outer shell. Entire districts were visible beneath transparent armored domes. Artificial lights glowed across its surface like cities at night. Because they were cities. The realization hit the bridge crew all at once. The humans had not built a warship. They had built a moving world. One of the Dominion tacticians spoke carefully. Commander, there are life signatures everywhere inside it. How many? The officer hesitated. Approximately 11 million. Thalek frowned. That is impossible. No, Commander, another officer whispered while scanning deeper. It's worse. New scans appeared across the central hologram. Schools, factories, hydroponic farms, transportation systems, residential districts, parks. The structure contained an entire civilization. The humans had placed a city inside a fortress and sent it into space. A young Valkyrie navigator finally asked the question nobody else wanted to say aloud. Why would they do this? No one answered. Because the truth was becoming visible now. Humanity had not expanded into the stars the way other species had. Other races built colonies. Humans built strongholds. The gigantic structure continued advancing through space with terrifying patience. Massive engines burned behind it like artificial suns, each engine larger than Dominion cruisers. A transmission suddenly appeared across all frequencies. No encryption. No threats. No fear. A human woman appeared on the bridge holograms. Gray uniform. Silver hair tied tightly behind her head. Calm eyes. Unknown fleet, she said evenly. You are approaching protected human territory. Change course immediately. Thalek stared at her. No panic. No diplomatic desperation. Just certainty. He straightened slowly. I am Supreme Commander Thalek of the Valkyrie Dominion. This system now falls under Dominion authority. Power down your defenses and prepare for integration. The woman listened without expression. Then she asked a strange question. Commander, have your people ever tried invading humans before? Something about the way she said it made several bridge officers uncomfortable. Thalek narrowed his eyes. No. The woman nodded once. That explains the confidence. The transmission ended. For a moment, the bridge remained silent. Then alarms exploded across every tactical station. Commander. Human weapons charging. Energy readings escalating. Mass driver systems detected. Thalek's expression hardened instantly. So, he said quietly, they choose extinction. The massive human fortress finally rotated fully toward the Dominion fleet. And for the first time in thousands of years, the Valkyrie Dominion felt something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. The human fortress moved slowly through the darkness, but nothing about it felt weak. That was the first thing Supreme Commander Thalek could not understand. Every military doctrine in the known galaxy taught the same lesson. Speed wins wars. Fast ships survive. Fast weapons dominate. Fast fleets overwhelm. The Valkyrie Dominion had built an empire on that philosophy. Their fleets struck before enemies could react. Entire civilizations had surrendered simply because Valkyrie ships could appear above their worlds without warning. But the human structure advancing toward them ignored every accepted rule of warfare. It was massive, heavy, inefficient, and somehow, terrifying. Dominion analysts flooded the bridge with calculations. No known alloy should support that level of structural mass. Their acceleration is impossible. Thermal output exceeds projected reactor capacity. Scans show rotating internal population sectors. Another officer looked visibly disturbed. They brought civilians into a war zone. Thalek watched the fortress carefully. No, he said slowly. A new scan appeared. Millions of internal heat signatures remained completely stable. Restaurants, transit systems, residential blocks, children. The humans were not evacuating. They were living. Inside a war machine. The realization spread uneasily across the bridge crew. One of the younger officers finally asked, Commander, why would any species build like this? Thalek answered automatically. Fear. But even he no longer believed it. Because fear created bunkers. This thing was not a bunker. It was a declaration. The massive fortress continued forward until it positioned itself directly between Earth and the Dominion fleet. Protective. Immovable. Like a shield being raised. Then the human transmission returned. The same woman appeared again. Admiral Sarah Reed. Her face remained calm despite the thousands of Dominion weapons now targeting her fortress. You should leave, she said. Thalek almost admired the confidence. You believe this structure can stop us? Reed looked slightly confused by the question. No, she replied. I believe your people don't understand what humans are willing to survive. Silence filled the Dominion bridge. Thalek folded his hands behind his back. You speak confidently for a species surrounded by superior firepower. And you speak confidently for a species that's never fought humans. Again that strange certainty. No fear. No anger. No desperation. It unsettled him more than threats would have. Behind Reed, human officers moved calmly between stations. Nobody rushed. Nobody panicked. It looked less like a military command center and more like engineers solving routine maintenance problems. Thalek changed tactics. You built a city into a fortress, he observed. Why? For the first time Reed smiled slightly. Because eventually we realized something important. She stepped aside, allowing the camera feed to widen. The Dominion bridge suddenly saw more of the interior. People drinking coffee. Workers repairing machinery. Children walking through school corridors beneath armored ceilings. Entire parks growing beneath artificial sunlight. Life continuing normally while two fleets prepared for war. The image confused the Dominion officers more than any weapon could have. Reed spoke quietly. Every species in the galaxy builds ships to protect their people. Her eyes hardened slightly. Humans decided it was more efficient to turn the people into the ship. The transmission ended again. Nobody on the Dominion bridge spoke for several seconds. Then one tactical officer whispered, "That species is insane." No one disagreed. Meanwhile, deep inside the fortress city known as Bastion, life continued. Leo Martinez hated mornings. He stood inside cooling Sector 12 holding a diagnostic tablet while massive pipes thundered around him like industrial waterfalls. Heat from the fusion core traveled through the fortress and controlled rivers of energy powerful enough to vaporize steel. And one of the coolant regulators was failing again. Of course it is, Leo muttered. Around him, hundreds of technicians worked calmly despite the battle alerts echoing across public systems. Nobody was screaming. Nobody was evacuating. Because this was normal. Every citizen aboard Bastion understood one simple truth. If the fortress failed, humanity died. So humans adapted. Children learned emergency pressure seal procedures before mathematics. Teachers trained for hull breaches. Doctors trained with rifles. Even bakers completed disaster response certification. Human civilization aboard Bastion had evolved around survival. Not because humans loved war. But because humans refused extinction. Leo finally repaired the coolant valve and leaned against the railing overlooking the Great Canyon. The enormous structural gap stretched through the center of Bastion like an artificial valley. Thousands of transport ships moved through the open space like glowing insects between skyscraper-sized support pillars. It was beautiful. And heavily armored. A public announcement echoed through nearby corridors. Attention all citizens. Dominion fleet remains in high orbit. Defense condition remains active. Civilian sectors remain stable. Nobody reacted. A nearby food vendor continued serving breakfast. Two children argued over a game score. Somewhere farther down the corridor, music played softly. The galaxy would never understand humans. Other species fought wars to conquer. Humans fought because they wanted tomorrow to exist. High above the civilian sectors, Admiral Reed studied tactical projections silently. A younger officer approached carefully. "Ma'am? Dominion fleet numbers exceed predictions." "I know. They're faster than our targeting systems." Reed nodded once. "Of course they are." The officer hesitated. "Then how do we stop them?" Reed looked through the armored observation glass toward the silver Dominion fleet surrounding Earth. Elegant ships. Fast ships. Fragile ships. Then she spoke the sentence that would later spread across half the galaxy. "We don't need to hit them directly." The officer frowned slightly. Reed's eyes remained fixed on the enemy fleet. "Just fill space with enough metal," she said calmly, "and eventually speed stops mattering." Far below the command deck, millions of kinetic weapon systems began waking up. Supreme Commander Thalek had fought 31 campaigns across the outer spiral arm. He had burned rebellion worlds, crushed machine uprisings, broken planetary defense grids that entire civilizations once believed were invincible. But he had never seen a fleet remain this calm before annihilation. The human fortress still drifted protectively between Earth and the Dominion Armada like a black iron continent floating through vacuum. No retreat. No surrender. No fear. It irritated him. "Final warning," Thalek ordered across open frequencies. "Power down your defenses immediately." The human response came seconds later. Not from Admiral Reed. From a civilian broadcast channel. Music. Soft human piano music echoed strangely across military frequencies while millions of Dominion targeting systems locked onto Bastion. Several Valkyrie officers exchanged confused looks. "Commander," one whispered carefully. "Are they mocking us?" Thalek's patience ended. "Fire." The Dominion fleet moved instantly. Thousands of silver ships shifted formation with mechanical perfection. Energy rippled across the darkness as spinal weapons charged simultaneously. Space itself distorted beneath the pressure of concentrated plasma arrays. Then the stars disappeared. Blinding white beams erupted across the void and slammed directly into Bastion. The bridge of the Ascension Spear glowed from reflected light alone. On any known warship, the attack would have vaporized entire sections instantly. Even planetary shields would have collapsed. The Dominion officers watched carefully. Waiting for explosions. Waiting for panic. Waiting for the fortress city to die. Instead, the human fortress kept moving. Slowly. Steadily. Like the attack barely mattered. Dominion sensors flooded with contradictory readings. Outer armor intact. Thermal bloom minimal. No shield collapse detected. That's impossible. Another barrage struck Bastion. Then another. Thousands of plasma beams hammered the black armored surface continuously until entire sections glowed red from heat. Still the fortress advanced. Thalek narrowed his eyes. Magnify impact zones. The main display zoomed closer. And the Dominion bridge fell silent. The outer armor wasn't melting. It was shedding layers. Massive armored plates peeled away from Bastion's surface like burned skin falling from an animal. Beneath each destroyed layer waited another. And another. And another. The humans had not built armor. They had built geological depth. One Dominion engineer stared at the scans in horror. "Commander, they're using sacrificial thermal plating." "How many layers?" The engineer swallowed carefully. We cannot determine the end depth." For the first time in years, uncertainty crept into Thalek's voice. How much material did humans put into this thing? No one answered, because the numbers had become absurd. Inside Bastion itself, the attack barely registered. Leo felt a faint vibration beneath his boots while replacing a damaged coolant relay. That was all. Nearby workers continued eating lunch. Someone laughed at a joke. Public screens displayed battlefield updates beside weather reports for agricultural sectors. A child somewhere nearby asked her mother if the Dominion attack would delay school tomorrow. Her mother answered casually, "Only if they hit the transit rings." Life continued. That terrified the Dominion more than any weapon could. Back on the command deck, Admiral Reed watched the tactical feed calmly. "Enemy firing patterns?" "Predictable," her tactical officer replied. "Good." Reed stood slowly. "Open Layer 1. Deep inside Bastion, gigantic blast doors began unlocking. Entire sections of the fortress shifted mechanically with sounds like mountains grinding together. Then the darkness around Bastion exploded. Not with lasers. Not with plasma. Metal. Thousands of massive rotary cannons emerged from hidden armored chambers across the fortress surface. Rail systems extended outward like mechanical skeletons awakening from hibernation. Dominion scanners struggled to identify the weapons. One officer finally answered in disbelief. "Kinetic systems?" Another officer sounded even more confused. "They're projectile weapons." Several Valkyrie commanders actually laughed. Primitive. Physical ammunition had become obsolete thousands of years earlier. Plasma was faster. Energy weapons were cleaner. More advanced. Then Bastion fired. The void disappeared beneath steel. Millions of tungsten spheres erupted outward in expanding clouds moving at catastrophic velocity. Entire regions of space transformed instantly into storms of metal traveling fast enough to punch through warship armor. The Dominion fleet reacted immediately. Fast ships twisted through space with elegant precision. Some escaped. Some didn't. The first Dominion cruiser died when 3 tungsten rounds punched directly through its central reactor chamber. The ship vanished in white fire before nearby vessels even understood what happened. Then another exploded. Then 6 more. The tactical situation changed instantly. Human targeting systems were not aiming for ships. They were saturating entire regions of space. Speed suddenly became a disadvantage. The faster Dominion ships maneuvered, the faster they flew into walls of metal. Chaos spread across Dominion formations. Collision impacts rising. Our predictive movement systems are failing. They're turning open space into a minefield. A shattered cruiser spun helplessly through the battlefield, trailing atmosphere and burning debris. Another Dominion vessel lost half its forward structure when kinetic rounds punched through its engines. For the first time in Dominion history, their fleet formations broke. Thalek stared at the tactical projection in disbelief. The humans weren't fighting elegantly. They weren't fighting efficiently. They were weaponizing probability itself. Across the battlefield, Bastion continued firing relentlessly. Millions, billions, trillions of metal rounds flooded space like industrialized violence. Admiral Reed finally spoke quietly. "Humans learned something a long time ago." Her officers listened silently while kinetic batteries thundered across the stars. "Eventually," she said, "everything fast runs into something heavier." Then new alarms erupted across the command deck. "Admiral." Multiple Dominion strike wings approaching the civilian rings. Reed's eyes hardened instantly. The enemy had adapted faster than expected. Several Dominion destroyers accelerated directly toward Bastion's residential sectors, weaving through the kinetic storm with suicidal precision. Their goal was obvious: terror. If humans refused military defeat, the Dominion would target civilians instead. Deep inside Bastion, emergency sirens finally activated across public sectors. Leo looked upward immediately. This time the vibration beneath the floor felt different. Closer. Dangerously close. Public lights shifted from white to deep crimson. And somewhere far above the city, the outer defense layers began to fail. The first explosion hit residential Ring 7 at 14:32 station time. Not a direct impact. A near miss. But in space, near misses still killed. The Dominion destroyer's plasma beam carved across Bastion's outer hull for nearly 3 miles before defense cannons finally tore the attacking ship apart. Entire armor sections vaporized instantly. Shockwaves thundered through civilian sectors beneath the impact zone like artificial earthquakes. Inside Bastion, lights flickered. People looked up briefly. Then most returned to what they were doing. Because panic was considered more dangerous than the attack itself. Leo felt the floor tremble beneath cooling Sector 12 while emergency bulkheads sealed automatically around nearby transit tunnels. A calm voice echoed through public speakers. Localized hull damage detected. Civilian sectors remain stable. Please continue standard emergency procedures. The message sounded almost routine. That was intentional. Human psychology teams had spent generations designing Bastion's emergency systems. Fear spread faster than fire inside enclosed civilizations. If millions panicked simultaneously, casualties would multiply before enemy weapons ever reached the core sectors. So humans normalized catastrophe. Children aboard Bastion learned evacuation routes before multiplication tables. Teachers conducted decompression drills every month. Entire apartment complexes practiced pressure seal exercises like ordinary fire drills. Survival had become culture. Leo grabbed his emergency kit automatically and moved with dozens of other technicians toward the damaged sectors. Nobody shouted. Nobody ran. The people around him simply adapted. A woman carrying groceries stopped beside an emergency locker, opened it, and calmly distributed oxygen masks to nearby civilians. 2 teenage students helped an elderly man secure a pressure harness. Further down the corridor, restaurant workers continued serving food to evacuation teams moving toward the outer rings. Humanity had transformed disaster response into everyday life. And that confused the Dominion more than anything else. Far outside the fortress, Supreme Commander Thalex studied incoming battlefield reports with growing frustration. Civilian casualties? Minimal, Commander. How? One tactical officer enlarged internal scans from the human structure. The bridge fell silent again. Entire residential sectors were reorganizing in real time. Transportation routes changed instantly. Medical stations expanded automatically. Repair crews moved through damaged corridors with practiced efficiency. Even the civilians themselves were assisting emergency operations. The humans behaved less like frightened citizens, and more like cells inside a living organism repairing itself. One Dominion officer whispered quietly. They prepared for this. Thalex stared at the moving fortress. No. The realization struck him slowly. The humans had prepared for everything. Back inside Bastion, Leo finally reached Emergency Sector C. The damage was worse up close. One entire corridor had decompressed into vacuum after structural supports failed beneath the plasma strike. Twisted metal floated through emergency containment fields while repair drones swarmed across shattered walls like mechanical insects. But the sector still functioned. That was the terrifying part. Humans never relied on single systems. Every important mechanism inside Bastion had backups. Then backups for the backups. A Dominion plasma beam strong enough to destroy ordinary warships had merely damaged one district inside the fortress city. Leo joined a repair team sealing fractured coolant conduits beneath the damaged residential ring. Nearby, medics treated injured civilians while children sat quietly wrapped in thermal blankets. No screaming. No hysteria. Just exhaustion. A little girl looked toward the damaged ceiling overhead. "Did we win?" she asked softly. One exhausted medic smiled while sealing a wound on another civilian's arm. "Not yet." The girl nodded seriously. Then she asked the question every human aboard Bastion secretly carried. "Will Earth be okay?" The medic answered instantly. Yes. Not because he knew. Because human civilization aboard Bastion depended on belief. If Earth survived, humanity survived. That idea held the fortress together more effectively than steel ever could. Far above the civilian sectors, Admiral Reed monitored the spreading damage carefully. Several officers waited nervously for orders. Residential casualties increasing. "I know." Dominion strike craft breached 2 defense grids. "I know." Another impact shook the command deck. This one stronger. Closer. A younger tactical officer finally lost composure. "Ma'am, if they keep targeting civilian sectors." Reed interrupted quietly. "They will." Silence filled the bridge. Because everyone understood the truth. The Dominion had finally recognized Bastion's weakness. Not reactors. Not engines. People. And humanity had known this moment would come from the very beginning. Reed activated a private tactical display. Hidden weapon systems illuminated across the hologram like sleeping predators. Entire defense layers remained unused. Experimental systems. Restricted systems. The ugly weapons. One commander stared at the display carefully. Admiral. Central Command never approved deployment of those systems. Reed's expression never changed. They also never expected aliens to start shooting children. No one argued after that. Outside the armored observation glass, Dominion fleets continued surrounding Earth with elegant formations of silver light. Beautiful ships. Advanced ships. Ships built for clean victories. Humanity did not build for victory. Humanity built for survival after losing. And that difference was about to change the war. Deep inside Bastion, massive blast doors began opening beneath sectors the Dominion had not even detected yet. Factories awakened. Rail systems charged. Buried reactors roared to life beneath armored mountain-sized compartments. Meanwhile, throughout the fortress city, civilians continued living. Teachers reopened classrooms inside emergency shelters. Food vendors fed repair crews. Musicians performed inside medical sectors to calm injured children. And millions of ordinary humans carried on with their lives while war thundered against the walls around them. The Dominion believed humanity lived inside the fortress because they feared the galaxy. They were wrong. The fortress existed because humans had accepted one brutal truth long ago. If the universe wanted monsters, humanity would become harder to kill than all of them. The Valkyrie Dominion had encountered resistance before. Some species fought bravely. Some fought desperately. A few even fought intelligently. But every civilization eventually reached the same point: fear. Fear always appeared eventually. Cities burned. Defense fleets collapsed. Civilian casualties mounted. And then enemy morale shattered. That was how war worked. That was how it had always worked. But the humans aboard Bastion refused to behave correctly. Supreme Commander Thalek stood motionless inside the Ascension Spear while battlefield projections updated around him. The numbers made no sense. Human civilian sectors were damaged. Thousands injured. Multiple residential districts exposed to vacuum. And yet, human combat effectiveness was increasing, not decreasing. Commander, one tactical analyst said carefully, the fortress is accelerating. Thalek frowned. Toward where? The officer hesitated. Toward us. Silence spread slowly across the bridge. That was impossible. No civilization moved closer after sustaining civilian losses. No rational species escalated under pressure. But Bastion continued advancing directly into Dominion formations like an iron mountain ignoring gravity itself. One officer suddenly spoke in visible confusion. Why are they attacking harder? No one answered. Because nobody understood humanity yet. Far below Bastion's command deck, emergency crews continued sealing damaged residential sectors while millions of citizens adapted to wartime conditions with terrifying efficiency. Leo worked beside exhausted repair teams inside Hull Ring 4 while sparks rained from shattered maintenance conduits overhead. The station around him shook continuously from distant impacts. Still people worked. Still people endured. A nearby transport platform arrived carrying volunteers from civilian districts deeper inside Bastion. Not soldiers. Teachers. Mechanics. Farm workers. A baker stepped off the platform carrying medical supplies over one shoulder. Leo stared briefly. You volunteered? The older man shrugged casually. Can't bake if the fortress explodes. Then he walked directly into the damaged sector smoke without hesitation. That was humanity's real strength. Not technology. Not weapons. Collective stubbornness. Meanwhile, outside the fortress city, the battle escalated violently. Dominion strike wings continued weaving through expanding clouds of human kinetic fire while Bastion unleashed relentless storms of tungsten rounds into surrounding space. Entire regions of vacuum now glowed with debris, plasma residue, shattered armor and drifting wreckage. The battlefield no longer resembled elegant warfare. It resembled industrial slaughter. And the humans were adapting faster. A Dominion cruiser exploded after hidden rail batteries emerged from beneath Bastion's lower armor sectors. Another vanished when human interceptor craft deliberately rammed its engines during a suicide attack. The Valkyrie crews watching battlefield feeds began experiencing something their species rarely encountered: uncertainty. One Dominion pilot transmitted frantically moments before impact. They're not retreating. Static burst across the channel. They're accelerating toward collision. Then silence. Another tactical officer spoke nervously. "Commander, human strike craft survival rates are extremely low. And yet they continue attacking," Thalek replied coldly. That was the problem. Humans did not seem emotionally attached to battlefield survival in the same way other species were. They fought like people who had already accepted death long before the battle began. The realization unsettled even veteran Dominion commanders. Because species willing to die were dangerous. Species willing to die calmly were terrifying. Back on Bastion's command deck, Admiral Reed watched Dominion formations slowly reorganizing. "They're hesitating now," one officer observed. Reed nodded slightly. "They've started thinking." Another explosion shook the fortress. Warning symbols flashed briefly across several tactical displays. Outer defense grid compromised. 3 Dominion carriers approaching firing range. Civilian Ring 9 exposed. The bridge tensed immediately. Reed remained calm. Open vault sector black. Several officers looked toward her instantly. One commander spoke carefully. "Admiral, are you certain?" "Yes." That system was never fully tested. Reed finally looked toward him. Neither was the Dominion invasion. No further objections followed. Deep beneath Bastion, kilometer-thick blast doors began unlocking with sounds like continents splitting apart. Ancient machinery awakened slowly beneath the fortress city. Massive power conduits surged alive. Entire reactor sections diverted energy into hidden systems buried since Bastion's construction. The Dominion scanners detected the energy spike immediately. "Commander." Unknown weapon signatures emerging. Energy readings climbing exponentially. Thalek narrowed his eyes. "Identify the weapon." The tactical crews worked frantically. Nothing matched known technology. The energy readings were unstable. Primitive. Violent. Then the answer appeared. One officer looked horrified. "Magnetic acceleration system." Another officer frowned. "That's impossible. The scale required would be absurd." Then Bastion opened. Gigantic armored sections split apart across the fortress surface, revealing something hidden deep inside the moving city. A cannon. No. A tunnel. An enormous magnetic rail system stretching directly through the center mass of Bastion itself. The humans had converted the fortress city into a weapon. Several Dominion officers stared in disbelief. "How large is that accelerator?" The answer came quietly. "Nearly 6 miles. For the first time since entering the Sol system." Supreme Commander Thalek felt fear. Real fear. Because he finally understood what humanity had done. Other species built ships around weapons. Humans built civilizations around war. Back inside Bastion, public announcement systems activated calmly across every civilian sector. "Attention all citizens. Brace protocol initiating. Magnetic discharge in 30 seconds. People reacted immediately. Coffee cups secured. Transit systems locked. Children practiced brace positions automatically beneath classroom desks. The entire fortress city moved like a living organism preparing for impact. Leo grabbed a support rail inside cooling sector 12 while nearby workers secured emergency seals. One technician laughed nervously. "Think this'll scare them?" Another answered without looking up. "Hope so." Then Bastion fired. The universe cracked. A single tungsten projectile larger than a Dominion destroyer accelerated through the 6-mile magnetic rail at impossible velocity. The shot crossed space so fast Dominion targeting systems never tracked it properly. One moment the projectile existed. The next, an entire Dominion battle carrier disappeared. Not exploded. Erased. The kinetic impact ripped through the carrier and the 3 ships behind it before finally vanishing into deep space, trailing expanding clouds of molten debris and plasma fire. Silence spread across Dominion communications. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because every Valkyrie officer watching the tactical feed understood the same horrifying truth. The humans had built a fortress capable of killing fleets with a single shot. And they had aimed it directly at the heart of the Dominion formation. For 12 full seconds, nobody aboard the Ascension Spear spoke. Dominion tactical displays still struggled to process what had happened. One moment battle carrier Vale Torith existed. The next, it had become expanding vapor and molten fragments scattering across thousands of miles of space. 3 escort cruisers behind it suffered the same fate. The human projectile had not slowed. It simply continued forward into deep space like a god punching through paper. Silence lingered across the Dominion bridge. Then panic began. Fleet spacing collapsing. Multiple commanders requesting withdrawal vectors. Shockwaves disrupting navigation systems. One younger officer whispered in disbelief. That wasn't a weapon. Thalek finished the thought quietly. That was extinction. His eyes remained fixed on the gigantic fortress city advancing through drifting wreckage. Now he understood the true purpose of Bastion. Not defense. Deterrence. Humanity had created a machine so catastrophic that any species attacking Earth would fear victory itself. And somehow that realization frightened Thalek more than the weapon. Because civilizations that built doomsday systems usually hid them. Humans put theirs around children. Back aboard Bastion, the magnetic accelerator glowed red-hot deep within the fortress core. Entire structural sectors shook violently from recoil. Warning sirens echoed through industrial rings while engineers fought to stabilize overheating systems. Leo nearly lost his footing when another tremor thundered through cooling Sector 12. Nearby coolant pipes screamed beneath rising pressure. Core temperature spiking, a technician shouted. Emergency circulation failing in Ring 8. Leo looked at the thermal readings and felt his stomach tighten. The accelerator shot had pushed Bastion dangerously close to reactor overload. One more discharge at that power level could melt entire sections of the fortress from the inside. And everyone knew it. Above them, Admiral Reed studied the same reports silently. The accelerator needs 42 minutes minimum before another firing cycle, an officer warned. We may not have 42 minutes, another replied. Outside the command deck glass, Dominion formations were reorganizing rapidly. Fear had not broken them. It had evolved them. The Valkyrie fleet spread outward into wider attack formations, avoiding clustered formations vulnerable to the human cannon. Smart. Fast. Adaptive. Reed respected that. Then new Dominion ships emerged from hyperspace. The bridge lights dimmed automatically as enormous energy signatures flooded tactical systems. One officer turned pale. Admiral? Massive silver shadows appeared behind the Dominion fleet. Mountain-sized warships. Planet Killer class. The heavy fleet had arrived. Even Bastion's crew fell silent for a moment. The largest Dominion vessel alone stretched nearly 20 miles long, covered in glowing energy veins pulsing beneath translucent armor plating. Its main weapon slowly rotated toward Earth. One tactical analyst whispered, Suncracker class. Another officer swallowed hard. Those ships were designed to crack planetary cores. Reed remained calm. But inside she understood the situation instantly. The Dominion had stopped treating humanity as a minor campaign. This was extermination now. Far across the battlefield, Supreme Commander Thalek finally spoke again. All fleets maintain distance from the fortress accelerator. His voice remained steady, professional, controlled. But everyone aboard the bridge noticed something subtle. He no longer sounded confident. He sounded cautious. Deploy heavy assault formation, he ordered quietly. The humans wished to demonstrate endurance. His eyes narrowed toward Bastion. Let us determine their limit. The Dominion heavy fleet advanced. Space itself seemed to darken around the massive warships as colossal weapons charged slowly across their hulls. Energy readings climbed beyond anything Bastion had previously faced. Then the suncrackers fired. The stars vanished behind white light. Beams wider than cities slammed directly into Bastion's forward armor layers with catastrophic force. Entire sections of the fortress surface vaporized instantly. Kilometer-thick armored plates melted like wax beneath sustained thermal impact. For the first time since the battle began, Bastion stopped moving forward. Shockwaves thundered through civilian sectors. Entire districts lost power. Emergency lights flooded corridors crimson. Inside schools, children braced beneath reinforced desks while teachers calmly recited emergency instructions over shaking floors. In medical sectors, doctors continued surgery while explosions echoed through distant hull layers. Restaurants converted into emergency aid stations. Factories sealed breached sectors automatically. And millions of ordinary humans endured. Again. Because survival had become instinct. Deep inside residential Ring 9, Leo helped evacuate civilians through collapsing transit tunnels while alarms screamed overhead. A nearby wall suddenly ruptured inward from pressure failure. 3 workers were blown instantly into vacuum before emergency bulkheads slammed shut. The corridor fell silent. Everyone froze briefly. Then the survivors continued moving. No breakdowns. No panic. Just grim momentum. That terrified the Dominion observers monitoring internal scans. One Valkyrie analyst stared at the human civilian feeds in visible horror. Commander, they are continuing daily operations. Thalek frowned. What? The analyst enlarged internal surveillance scans from Bastion. Despite catastrophic damage, civilians still organized supplies. Teachers protected children. Repair crews advanced toward breaches. Transport systems continued functioning. The humans behaved like a species that expected suffering and had learned how to survive it. One Dominion officer finally whispered the truth none of them wanted to admit. They built this fortress knowing it would burn. Back aboard Bastion's command deck, another suncracker beam slammed across the outer hull. This time the damage cut deeper. Entire defense sectors vanished from tactical maps. Warning systems exploded across every display. Hull penetration in Ring 6. Atmospheric collapse spreading. Civilian casualties rising rapidly. An officer looked toward Admiral Reed carefully. "Ma'am, if they keep firing like this." Reed finished the sentence herself. "They'll eventually reach the core." Silence followed. Because everyone understood what lived in the core. The heart of Bastion. The population sectors. The families. Humanity itself. Then Reed activated a hidden tactical overlay. Several officers stared in shock. One commander spoke carefully. "Admiral. Central Command prohibited deployment of that protocol." Reed's expression hardened. Central Command isn't being shot at by planet killers. Outside the fortress, massive armored structures began separating slowly from Bastion's lower hull. Thousands of hidden engine signatures ignited simultaneously. Dominion scanners struggled to classify the objects. Then the answer appeared. Attack craft. No. Suicide craft. Tiny compared to Bastion itself, but brutally overpowered for their size. Human wasp fighters. Cockpits strapped to engines and oversized guns. Built for one purpose only. Getting close enough to hurt something bigger. And humanity was preparing to launch all of them. The launch sirens echoed across Bastion like the heartbeat of something ancient waking up angry. Deep beneath the fortress city, thousands of armored hangars opened simultaneously. Massive blast doors folded outward while launch rails extended into vacuum. Rows upon rows of wasp fighters waited in silence. Ugly machines. Brutal machines. Every part of them existed for efficiency instead of beauty. No polished hulls. No elegant curves. Just engines, armor, guns, and enough fuel for a one-way attack. Most pilots would not survive. Every pilot already knew that. Inside Launch Bay 14, Commander Elias Kane walked slowly between the waiting fighters while technicians armed nuclear penetrators beneath the wings. Young pilots sat inside cockpits pretending not to be afraid. Some listened to music. Some stared silently at family photos attached beside targeting displays. One pilot laughed nervously while sealing his flight helmet. "Think the aliens know we're all insane yet?" Another answered without looking up. "They're about to." Kane stopped beside his own fighter and looked across the launch bay. Hundreds of pilots looked back at him. Humanity's disposable spearheads. And every single one had volunteered. That part always hurt the most. Kane activated the squadron channel. "The Dominion thinks Bastion is our shield," he said calmly. His voice echoed through hundreds of cockpits. "They still don't understand." Technicians disconnected fueling cables. Engines ignited one after another. Blue light flooded the launch chamber. Kane's eyes hardened. "We are the shield." Then the launch countdown began. Far outside the fortress city, Dominion heavy warships continued hammering Bastion with suncracker beams powerful enough to crack moons apart. The giant fortress burned. Armor peeled away. Entire outer defense layers collapsed into molten debris. But Bastion still moved forward. Slowly. Relentlessly. Supreme Commander Thalek watched the advancing fortress with growing unease. Every tactical prediction said the humans should already be retreating. Every psychological model predicted collapsing morale. Instead, the humans kept getting closer. "Commander," one officer reported carefully, "the fortress velocity is increasing again." Thalek stared at the tactical projection. Impossible. The humans were taking catastrophic damage. Why advance? Then new alarms erupted across the bridge. Multiple launch signatures detected. Small attack craft exiting the fortress. Thousands of heat signatures exploded outward from Bastion like a swarm escaping a dying hive. Dominion analysts enlarged the tactical feed. And several officers visibly recoiled. The human fighters weren't built for survival. They were missiles with pilots inside. Minimal shielding. Maximum engines. Maximum weapons. Pure aggression turned into machinery. One Dominion pilot transmitted nervously across fleet channels. "They're accelerating directly into the heavy formation." Another pilot shouted moments later. They aren't evading fire. Because they weren't. Human Wasp fighters flew straight through defensive barrages with horrifying determination. Some exploded instantly beneath Dominion plasma fire. The survivors kept going. One fighter lost half its wing and still accelerated forward. Another continued attacking while literally burning apart. Dominion targeting systems struggled to understand their behavior because no logical species fought this way. The humans were not trying to survive the battle. They were trying to make the battle expensive. Then the first Wasp squadron reached the Dominion line. The battlefield became chaos. Human fighters slammed nuclear penetrators directly into Dominion hulls before detonating at point-blank range. Smaller ships vanished instantly in expanding white fire. One Wasp pilot intentionally flew through a damaged cruiser's reactor breach before triggering overload manually. The explosion tore the cruiser in half. Another human fighter rammed directly into a Dominion carrier bridge. Both ships disappeared together. Supreme Commander Thalek watched the slaughter in stunned silence. This species, one officer whispered shakily. They weaponized themselves. That was the moment fear truly entered the Dominion fleet. Not fear of defeat. Fear of humanity itself. Back inside Bastion, the cost of the battle finally reached civilian sectors completely. A suncracker beam punched through Outer Ring 6 and tore directly into Residential District Kappa. For one horrible second, millions aboard Bastion saw open space through the wound. Entire apartment towers vanished into vacuum instantly. Transport systems exploded. Artificial gravity failed across multiple sectors. Thousands died before emergency bulkheads sealed. Leo felt the shockwave throw him against a maintenance wall hard enough to crack his shoulder armor. The lights died immediately afterward. Darkness swallowed the corridor. Only emergency strobes remained. Red. Flashing. Blood-colored. Nearby civilians screamed for the first time since the battle began. Not panic. Pain. Real human pain. Leo forced himself upright and looked through the shattered observation window beside the corridor. A section of Bastion was simply gone. An entire neighborhood erased. Homes. Families. Schools. Vacuum swallowed everything beyond the broken hull. For several seconds Leo couldn't move. Then emergency systems activated again. Bulkheads sealed. Atmosphere stabilized. Medical drones arrived. And the surviving humans kept working. A wounded woman nearby grabbed Leo's arm while blood floated from a cut above her eye. "Don't just stand there," she snapped angrily. "There are people trapped below us." That was humanity. Even grief had to wait. Far above the ruined civilian sectors, Admiral Reed finally received the casualty numbers. The bridge fell silent after reading them. Thousands dead. Tens of thousands injured. One entire residential district destroyed. An officer looked toward Reed carefully. "Admiral?" But he didn't know what to say. "Sorry? We're losing? Retreat?" None of those words belonged on Bastion. Reed stared silently at the tactical display while Dominion heavy fleets continued firing. Then she noticed something. The Dominion formations had slowed. Not strategically. Emotionally. They feared getting close now. Humanity had infected them with uncertainty. And uncertainty killed faster than weapons. Reed finally stood. "Prepare collision trajectory." The entire command deck froze. One officer turned pale. "Collision?" Reed's eyes remained fixed on the largest Dominion flagship, the Star Eater, a 25-mile warship capable of destroying planets. Humanity's answer was simple. "Ram it." Several commanders stared at her in disbelief. "That would destroy Bastion." Reed nodded once. "Yes." Silence filled the bridge again. Then slowly, human officers returned to work. Because nobody aboard Bastion asked whether survival was possible anymore. Only whether humanity could hurt the enemy badly enough before dying. Outside the fortress city, massive engines ignited across Bastion's lower hull. The gigantic fortress began accelerating directly toward the Dominion flagship. And for the first time in recorded history, the Valkyrie Dominion started retreating from a species they were supposed to exterminate. The Dominion fleet had spent 4,000 years teaching the galaxy to fear them. Now for the first time, they were backing away. Supreme Commander Thalek stood frozen at the center of the Ascension Spear while tactical projections updated around him in chaotic waves. The impossible fortress city was accelerating. Directly toward the Dominion command formation. Toward the Star Eater. Toward collision. "Commander," one officer said carefully, trying to hide panic, "if the fortress impacts the flagship at current velocity." "I know," Thalek interrupted sharply. "You did know. The calculations were already running across every Dominion tactical system. If Bastion rammed the Star Eater, both structures would die, along with everything nearby. Thousands of Dominion ships would vanish inside the expanding debris field. The humans were willing to destroy their own civilization just to drag the Dominion down with them. That realization poisoned Dominion morale instantly, because it violated the most sacred principle of galactic warfare. Civilizations protected themselves first. Humans did not. Humans protected the future, even if they died creating it. Outside the bridge glass, Bastion burned across the stars like an artificial apocalypse. Entire armor layers glowed molten red beneath continuous suncracker impacts. Fires raged across exposed structural sectors. Explosions rippled through the giant fortress city constantly. Still it advanced. Like pain meant nothing. Like death itself had become irrelevant. One Dominion navigator whispered shakily, "How do we stop something that doesn't fear destruction?" Nobody answered. Because the Dominion finally understood the horrible truth. They weren't fighting soldiers anymore. They were fighting a species that had adapted to extinction pressure for centuries. Back aboard Bastion, emergency lights flooded civilian sectors while collision alarms echoed across every district. Millions of humans already understood what was happening. The fortress was not retreating. The fortress was charging. Leo sat beside exhausted repair crews inside a damaged medical shelter while public broadcasts updated continuously. A nearby child looked toward the emergency screen nervously. "Are we going to die?" Her mother hesitated only briefly before answering. "Maybe." The honesty stunned Leo more than the explosions. But the woman smiled afterward and pulled the child closer. "And we're still here." Around them, civilians continued helping each other despite the growing certainty of death. Doctors operated without rest. Teachers calmed children through collapsing corridors. Mechanics rebuilt failing systems with burned hands and exhausted eyes. Nobody stopped. Because humanity had already crossed the point where survival mattered more than purpose. Far beneath the civilian rings, Bastion's final defense systems awakened. Restricted systems. Forbidden systems. Weapons humanity once promised itself never to use. Admiral Reed stood inside Tactical Vault Black watching hidden launch chambers open one after another beneath the fortress. An older officer beside her looked pale. "We only built these as deterrents." Reed answered quietly. "And deterrence failed." The officer swallowed hard. Below them, hundreds of autonomous hunter mines launched silently into space. Not ordinary explosives. Intelligent kill systems. Each one carried adaptive targeting, short-range engines, anti-ship penetrators, reactor destabilizers. Human engineers called them hounds. The galaxy would later call them nightmares. Outside Bastion, the hounds disappeared into drifting debris fields surrounding the battlefield. Invisible. Waiting. Meanwhile, the Dominion heavy fleet reorganized frantically around the Star Eater. Thalex commanders finally abandoned offensive doctrine completely. Redirect all firepower. Stop the fortress before impact. Protect the flagship. Dominion formations collapsed inward defensively as thousands of ships repositioned desperately between Bastion and the Star Eater. That was when the hounds attacked. The battlefield exploded into confusion. Hunter mines emerged from debris clouds directly beneath Dominion formations before accelerating into vulnerable engine sections and reactor vents. Ships detonated instantly. Others lost power and drifted helplessly into friendly formations. Panic spread. One Dominion cruiser suddenly exploded from internal overload after a hound penetrated its reactor shielding. Another ship fired accidentally into Allied vessels while trying to evade multiple incoming mines. The Dominion battle line shattered, and the humans pushed harder. Wasp fighters surged through the chaos like predators smelling blood. Human pilots deliberately herded Dominion ships toward expanding hound kill zones before striking weakened formations at close range. The battlefield no longer resembled warfare. It resembled extermination. Supreme Commander Thalex stared at the collapsing tactical projection in disbelief. The humans weren't winning through superior technology. They were winning through psychological corruption. Every Dominion captain now feared debris fields, damaged ships, hidden mines, close engagements, even empty space itself. Humanity had transformed the battlefield into paranoia. And paranoid fleets died quickly. Then Bastion fired its accelerator cannon again. The fortress should not have been capable of another shot. Its cooling systems were failing. Its reactor sectors overloaded. Entire structural rings burned from internal stress. And yet the humans fired anyway. Because humans always pushed machinery past safe limits during war. The second tungsten projectile tore through the battlefield like divine punishment. 2 Dominion carriers disappeared instantly. The shot clipped the edge of the Star Eater itself, tearing away an entire armored flank nearly 4 miles wide. For the first time in Dominion history, the flagship bled. Shockwaves rippled across every Dominion communication channel. Panic followed immediately. The flagship is damaged. Structural failure spreading. Human projectile breached primary armor. Impossible. The Star Eater was designed to survive planetary collisions. Humanity had wounded it with raw industrial violence. Inside Bastion's command deck, alarms screamed continuously now. The fortress was dying. Reactor temperatures critical. Civilian casualties catastrophic. Outer hull integrity collapsing. And still Admiral Reed refused retreat. One officer finally asked the question nobody else dared say aloud. "Ma'am, when do we stop?" Reed looked toward the burning Dominion fleet beyond the observation glass. Then toward Earth behind it. Humanity's home. Humanity's cradle. Humanity's reason. Her answer came softly. When they fear us more than they hate us. Outside the fortress city, Bastion accelerated harder toward the crippled Star Eater. And across the battlefield, the Valkyrie Dominion finally understood the truth that would haunt their species forever. Humans were not the prey species of the galaxy. Humans were what happened when prey survived long enough to become monsters. The Star Eater was retreating. That single fact shattered the morale of the Valkyrie Dominion more effectively than any weapon humanity possessed. For 4,000 years, the Dominion flagship had represented absolute victory. Entire civilizations surrendered the moment its shadow appeared above their worlds. Now it was burning. Retreating. Bleeding atmosphere into space while an enraged human fortress chased it across the battlefield like a wounded predator hunting something larger than itself. Supreme Commander Thalex stared at the tactical projection in numb disbelief. How bad is the damage? No one answered immediately, because nobody wanted to say the numbers aloud. Finally, one engineer spoke carefully. Primary armor penetration extends through 7 internal sectors. Another officer added. Reactor shielding compromised. A third voice whispered. The human kinetic strike destabilized structural gravity anchors. Silence spread across the bridge. The Star Eater was dying. Not quickly, but inevitably. And every Dominion officer understood exactly who had done this. Humans. The primitive species. The slow species. The species the galaxy dismissed as emotionally unstable animals. Now the Dominion feared them more than supernovas. Outside the bridge glass, Bastion continued accelerating forward despite catastrophic internal damage. The giant fortress city looked less like a warship now and more like a collapsing continent held together by anger alone. Entire sections burned openly into vacuum. Several engine clusters failed completely. Millions inside the fortress were either injured, trapped, or already dead. And still the humans advanced. One young Dominion officer finally broke. Commander, what if they actually ram us? Nobody mocked the question. Because everyone aboard the Ascension Spear secretly feared the same thing. Back aboard Bastion, the situation had become hell. Emergency systems were failing faster than repair crews could stabilize them. Entire civilian sectors lost gravity intermittently. Fires spread through damaged infrastructure while overworked reactor systems pushed closer to overload every second. Leo moved through collapsed transit corridors carrying injured civilians toward emergency shelters deeper inside the fortress. Bodies floated through damaged sections where gravity had failed completely. Children cried quietly beneath emergency blankets while exhausted medics worked with bloody hands and failing equipment. The fortress city was dying. But nobody talked about surrender. That word no longer existed aboard Bastion. A nearby emergency screen flickered with a live battlefield feed. The Star Eater filled the display. Burning. Retreating. Human fighters swarming around it like hornets. For a moment, everyone in the shelter stopped moving. Even exhausted civilians stared silently at the wounded Dominion flagship. And slowly, people began smiling. Not because they believed they would survive. Because the enemy was finally hurting too. Far above them, Admiral Reed stood alone inside the central observation chamber. The battlefield stretched endlessly beyond the armored glass. Burning wreckage drifted through the stars. Destroyed Dominion ships floated like shattered silver bones across the void. Human wrecks burned beside them. The cost had become unimaginable. A tactical officer entered quietly. Admiral? Reed didn't turn around. Report. The Star Eater is attempting emergency warp withdrawal. That made sense. The Dominion finally understood Bastion could not be stopped conventionally. So they would retreat, repair, return later with larger fleets. Humanity would survive today, only to die tomorrow. Reed closed her eyes briefly. Unacceptable. The officer continued nervously. Our reactor core won't survive prolonged acceleration. I know. And collision probability with the Star Eater keeps decreasing. They're pulling away too fast. Again. I know. The officer hesitated before speaking the final truth. If they escape, Earth won't survive the next invasion. Silence. Heavy. Exhausted. Then Admiral Reed opened a restricted tactical channel. Connect me to all command sectors. Across Bastion, surviving officers received the transmission instantly. Reed's voice echoed through burning command centers, damaged repair bays, emergency shelters, and failing defense grids. Come. Steady. Human. The Dominion believes we are defending Earth, she said quietly. Outside the fortress, Bastion's engines burned brighter. We are not. The officers listened silently. We are teaching the galaxy a lesson. Deep inside Bastion's core, ancient reactor systems began unlocking automatically. Emergency safeguards disabled. Containment protocols overridden. Several engineering officers immediately realized what Reed intended. One of them went pale. Admiral, if the core breaches during collision? It will. Millions aboard Bastion suddenly received priority emergency notifications. Not evacuation orders. Not surrender instructions. Brace warnings. Humanity understood instantly. The fortress itself was becoming a bomb. Leo stared at the emergency screen while nearby civilians slowly absorbed the meaning of the message. A little boy looked toward his father. Are we losing? His father pulled him closer gently. No. The man's eyes remained fixed on the burning battlefield feed. We're making sure they remember us. Outside Bastion, Dominion tactical systems finally detected the truth. Commander. Massive reactor surge inside the fortress. Containment systems disengaging. Thalek's blood ran cold instantly. No. A horrified officer looked toward him. The humans are converting their fusion core into a detonation cascade. Another officer whispered shakily. If that fortress impacts the Star Eater now. Nobody finished the sentence. They didn't need to. The explosion would destroy everything nearby. The flagship. The surrounding Dominion fleet. Possibly the moon itself. And the humans were still accelerating directly toward them. Panic spread openly across Dominion communications. Ships broke formation. Captains abandoned coordinated withdrawal entirely. Some vessels attempted emergency jumps immediately. Others fired desperately at Bastion hoping to stop the collision before impact. Nothing worked, because the humans no longer cared about survival. They cared about consequence. Bastion burned through incoming fire like an executioner walking through rain. The gigantic fortress city accelerated harder. Closer. Closer. The wounded Star Eater attempted one final emergency jump. Then the hound struck again. Hidden hunter mines emerged from wreckage surrounding the flagship and detonated directly against its damaged warp systems. The jump drive failed catastrophically. The Star Eater slowed. And for the first time, Supreme Commander Thalek truly understood humanity. Not warriors. Not conquerors. Not heroes. A species that looked at extinction and decided the universe would fear killing them. The tactical display showed the impossible final trajectory clearly now. Bastion would collide with the Star Eater in less than 6 minutes. And there was nothing left in the galaxy capable of stopping it. The final 6 minutes changed the galaxy forever. Long after the battle ended, long after the wreckage cooled, long after new civilizations rose among the stars, every species still remembered where they were when humanity rammed the Star Eater. Across the battlefield, panic consumed the Valkyrie Dominion. Their perfect formations had collapsed completely. Silver warships scattered through burning debris fields while emergency warp signatures flashed desperately across the darkness. The Dominion no longer looked like conquerors. They looked like survivors trying to escape a natural disaster. And at the center of it all, Bastion continued advancing. The fortress city burned from thousands of wounds. Entire sections had gone dark forever. Fires raged openly across exposed structural layers while atmosphere vented endlessly into space behind it like streams of blood. But the giant fortress never slowed. Because 11 million humans were still inside it. Still alive. Still pushing forward together. Inside the civilian shelters, People sat quietly beneath flickering emergency lights while collision alarms echoed through the dying city. Some families held each other. Some prayed. Some simply watched the battlefield feeds in silence. Nobody screamed anymore. Fear had passed. Only resolve remained. Leo stood beside a shattered observation port deep inside Bastion's inner rings and watched the wounded Star Eater grow larger across the stars. The enemy flagship looked enormous now. Broken. Burning. Afraid. A little girl nearby pressed her hand against the armored glass. "Will they remember us?" she asked softly. Nobody answered immediately. Then an exhausted teacher sitting nearby spoke quietly. "Oh, sweetheart." She looked toward the burning Dominion fleet. "They'll remember humanity forever." Far above them, Admiral Sarah Reed stood alone on Bastion's command deck while reactor warnings screamed across every tactical display. Containment failure imminent. Core collapse unavoidable. Structural integrity critical. The fortress had minutes left. One surviving officer approached slowly. "Admiral?" Reed finally turned away from the observation glass. The officer struggled briefly before speaking. "It's been an honor. For the first time since the battle began." Sarah Reed smiled. Not proudly. Not victoriously. Just tired. "Humanity survived long enough to matter," she said softly. "That's enough." Outside the fortress city, the Star Eater attempted one final desperate maneuver. Massive engines ignited across its shattered hull as Dominion crews fought frantically to turn the dying flagship away from collision. Too late. Bastion was already too close. Supreme Commander Thalek stared at the approaching fortress through the bridge glass while alarms drowned the command deck in red light. He finally understood the mistake the Dominion had made. They thought humanity feared death. But humanity had evolved on a violent world where survival was never guaranteed. A species born beneath extinction pressure did not think like civilized empires. Humans did not ask, "Can we survive?" Humans asked, "What survives after us?" And that difference doomed the Dominion. Thalek watched the fortress city approaching through burning wreckage. Millions of lives inside it. Millions willingly moving toward annihilation just to protect their home. His voice fell to a whisper. "What kind of species does this?" No one answered. Because there was no answer. Only humanity. Then Bastion opened every remaining communication channel simultaneously. Across every Dominion ship. Across every surviving human sector. Across every monitoring station in nearby systems. Admiral Reed's final transmission echoed into the stars. "Come. Steady. Unbreakable. You wanted Earth." Behind her, the dying fortress trembled violently. Reactor light glowed through collapsing walls like a miniature sun trying to escape. Reed looked directly into the transmission camera. "Come take it." Then Bastion hit the Star Eater. The universe turned white. The fusion core detonation ripped through both structures instantly. The explosion swallowed the Dominion flagship whole before expanding outward in a sphere of fire large enough to eclipse moons. Hundreds of Dominion ships vanished inside the blast. Others were torn apart by expanding shockwaves moving faster than targeting systems could track. Entire debris fields ignited. The stars themselves disappeared behind the light. For 17 seconds. There was nothing in the Sol system except fire. Then silence returned. Slowly. Cold. Endless. Where Bastion once existed, only drifting wreckage remained. Fragments of cities. Broken armor plates. Burning steel. The fortress city was gone. So was the Star Eater. So was most of the Dominion fleet. The Valkyrie survivors retreated immediately. Not strategically. Not orderly. They fled. And they never returned to Earth again. Years later, recovered Dominion records revealed something remarkable. After the Battle of Sol, the Valkyrie military rewrote its entire doctrine around one principle. Never corner humans. Because cornered humans did not surrender. They escalated. Across the galaxy, humanity became myth. Stories spread between civilizations about the species that built cities into warships. The species that turned civilians into defenders. The species willing to burn entire fleets just to buy tomorrow for their children. And in military academies across 1,000 worlds, young commanders studied the final lesson of Bastion. Not tactical superiority. Not technological dominance. But something far more dangerous. Humanity's refusal to break. Even now, centuries later, drifting wreckage still circles Earth's moon. Pieces of Bastion remain frozen in silence among the stars. And every human child learns the same words carved onto the memorial station built beside the ruins. If the universe demands monsters, humanity will survive long enough to become them.